Okay, welcome everybody to our launch of our Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda. My name is Julie Hollis and I'm Secretary General of EuroGeoSurveys, which is an association that represents 37 geological survey organisations of Europe. EuroGeoSurveys is more than 50 years old, and our collaboration of 37 members collectively comprise a workforce of more than 10,000. Our mission is to enable sustainable and responsible use of the Earth's subsurface environment and resources. And to achieve this, our vision is to establish a geological service for Europe, a data, information and knowledge-based service, drawing on the unique mandates of each national geological survey organisation and their collaborative strength to support a sustainable future for Europe. Of course, the basis for this is science, and in our particular case, geology, and we're well placed to deliver this. At the heart of our organisation are 11 geoscientific expert groups that bring together experts from our member organisations across Europe. Experts in Earth observation and geohazards, geoenergy, geoheritage, geochemistry, geological mapping and modelling, geophysics, marine geology, mineral resources, spatial information, urban geology, and water resources. This breadth of expertise of the surface and subsurface illustrates that geology is much more than just, for example, mining, and includes the complex interactions within our Earth between water, rocks, energy, minerals, and ecosystems. These diverse areas of knowledge of what is under our feet is what our members can collectively deliver. Our member organisations are research and advisory institutes, all of them closely connected with national government, all of them mandated to collect, archive, interpret and disseminate geological information for the benefit of European society. And our members and some additional partner organisations, 49 partners from 36 countries, are already working together through the Geological Service for Europe project. This is to deliver pan-European harmonised geoscientific datasets and knowledge that is needed if Europe hopes to achieve its goals for a clean industrial future, for an energy transition, for a carbon storage industry, for securing our raw material supply chains, for water resilience, for managing the increasing geohazards associated with climate change, adapting our cities to be more sustainable, and more. But what happens after the Geological Service for Europe project ends in 2027? That's why we're aiming for and pushing for and trying to deliver a geological service for Europe. And at the heart of that service will always be science. And that's why we're here today to launch EuroGeoSurveys' Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda. The EuroGeoSurveys SRIA sets out a forward-looking framework for the sustainable use and management of Europe's geological resources. It sets targeted goals, priorities and actions to support the energy transition while building European competitiveness. It focuses on geoscientific data, information and knowledge of the subsurface to address European and global challenges. It is the work of our entire European Geological Survey community, particularly with key input from our thematic scientific expert groups, who comprise more than 500 experts from across Europe. Our SRIA is subdivided into the geoscientific and digital framework, geoscientific strategic focus areas, and a section on integrated subsurface management and stakeholder engagement. Our strategic geoscientific goals are energy transition and decarbonisation, responsible raw materials, sustainable groundwater management, environmental hazard, and risk assessment. These are necessarily supported by a sound foundation for understanding the subsurface through harmonised geological data, mapping and modelling, and also an evolving digital framework for delivering harmonised subsurface data, the European Geological Data Infrastructure. These goals will not only support the green and digital transition, but also contribute to securing Europe's strategic autonomy in key sectors, while preserving the environment and ensuring public trust through transparency and societal engagement, addressed under the integrating subsurface management and stakeholder engagement. Our priorities for understanding the subsurface with geological data include reinvesting in updating of geological information of Europe, moving towards a European scale 3D geological model, and new technologies for subsurface investigation and geomodeling. Our priorities for a sustainable European geological data infrastructure include a standardized framework for fair data and metadata, transparent and accessible sustainable value chains, ensuring up-to-date and trusted data, and evolving our European geological data infrastructure, EGDI, into a pan-European geoscience knowledge hub. Our priorities for energy transition and decarbonisation are developing and deploying pan-European information and decision support systems to accelerate deployment of geothermal systems, accelerating and securing deployment of CO2 underground storage potential, enabling the unlocking of underground hydrogen storage capacities, and maturing next-generation geoenergy technologies. In responsible raw materials, our priorities are supporting raw materials exploration to assess European potential, improved responsible supply of raw materials in Europe, and supporting development of responsible mining and a circular economy. To support sustainable management of groundwater in a climate change context, our priorities are assessment, mitigation, and adaptation regarding water resources in a changing climate, impacts, nature-based solutions for sustainable groundwater management, protecting groundwater in relation to drinking water, ecosystems and public health, and groundwater and the green transition. And moving to managing geohazards and environmental risks. Our priorities are improving understanding of natural and human-induced geohazard events, and moving towards forecasting, risk assessment and mitigation, and reducing pollution and improving soil health. When it comes to integrating subsurface management and stakeholder engagement, our priorities are urban geology as a critical asset for sustainable cities, land use planning and geoheritage, and finally, in the area of societal and economic impact, establishing a network for knowledge sharing and best practices, public awareness, engagement and education, and policy support and advice services. As you can see, our SRIA addresses the research we consider needed across a very broad spectrum of thematic areas, but these diverse areas are all connected by their intersection in the European surface and subsurface, the geology beneath our feet. This is why we foresee the need for a geological service for Europe. This service is a service that Europe will need to fill gaps at European level for coordinated, data-driven and integrated sustainable use and management of geological resources, onshore and offshore, energy, raw materials, groundwater, soils, as well as environmental management and protection, and geohazard mitigation and adaptation. It will ensure that Europe's subsurface is not only optimized for economic benefit, but also responsibly managed and protected for future generations. Our SRIA presents EuroGeoSurveys roadmap supported by our members for achieving this vision of a geological service for Europe by aligning geoscientific research and innovation with Europe's most pressing strategic goals, including decarbonisation, resource management and climate resilience. It recognises that Europe's transition to a sustainable and green economy will depend heavily on our expert understanding of the surface and subsurface and on management and prioritisation of its increasing and competing uses. Our SRIA translates our expert understanding of geoscience in the key areas, key areas for future research and innovation into concrete and impactful actions. Through the implementation of our SRIA via a future geological service for Europe, EuroGeoSurveys will ensure that Europe's subsurface continues to be a cornerstone of its resilience and prosperity, contributing to a more sustainable future for all Europeans. Thank you. I would now like to invite our three panelists up to the stage, where we will get into a discussion about the role and the relevance of geoscience to Europe's policy objectives. First, I'd like to introduce Stephanie Heisinger, who is Head of Unit in Research and Low Carbon Technology Deployment in DG Climate Action. Welcome. Second, I welcome Rolf Kuby, who is Director General of Euromines. Welcome. And third, Jeroen Schuppers, who is a Senior Expert in DG RTD. Welcome. I'm just going to come over and join you. Great. Now, I'd like to emphasize that we have an audience here. You're very welcome to join in the discussion and to ask your questions. But to begin with, I am going to set the ball rolling, and I'd like to start by asking a question to Stephanie. Perhaps you could tell us a little more about what are the next steps for decarbonisation action in light of the announcement of the Clean Industrial Deal, and how does DG Klima need the geological surveys to step up?
Yes, thank you, Julie, and thank you also for this kind invitation. And well, the room is full of interested people. It's actually very heartening to see, because it's a very important topic. The Clean Industrial Deal, just allow me to spend a short moment on, a word on what that actually is. So it's one of our deliverables as the European Commission for the first 100 days of this mandate of the second von der Leyen Commission was adopted 2 weeks ago. And it's actually a set of incentives to further encourage the industrial decarbonization of Europe. So it's complementing the European Green Deal with a strategy setting out how we will build a sustainable business case for industrial decarbonization and the technologies needed. There are in this strategy 6 drivers for the business case, so for how to build the business case. And those are access to affordable energy, creating lead markets, public and private investment and related financing or funding, circularity and access to resources, global markets and international partnerships, and last, skills. And those drivers, I'm mentioning them because they are really important also when we then look at the challenges when it comes to the geology in Europe, because also the Clean Industrial Deal emphasizes the need to continue what we actually started last year in February with the industrial carbon management strategy, and to continue making also the business case for industrial carbon management, in particular carbon capture and storage, so underground storage. But also the Clean Industrial Deal, when it then comes to lead markets, has a commitment to creating carbon removal, so removing CO2 from the atmosphere, and permanent carbon removals, meaning removing it from the atmosphere and then storing it again underground. It's generally BECCS, so bioenergy and CCS, and DACS, direct air capture and DACS, and investing into those technologies. Of course, access to resources, I also mentioned this in the second part, but I'm pretty sure that others on the panel will speak to that. So the next steps in that context are really to continue to roll out the industrial carbon management strategy, to continue the work that we have announced there, in particular to to work further on the CO2 storage atlas, where we have already launched quite some work, and where we are developing an atlas of potential storage sites in the EU. There's currently one operational storage site in Norway. There's no operational CO2 storage site in the EU. So what we're trying with that atlas is, first of all, to map the potential sites in Europe, but then also link it through the work on an investment atlas to the industrial clusters, so that there is demand for CO2 storage linked to the potential supply of storage capacity, and that work is crucial, or your work is actually crucially important in that regard. We need to find critical raw materials. Again, somebody else will speak to it, but we also need to really understand the subsoil and the potential for, as I said, storing CO2. We are financing a Horizon Europe project, and the work that is going on there is, as I said, the first step. It will lead to further work, I'm pretty sure, so that we actually take, in the mid to long term, informed decisions about where the CO2 should go, but also where we need to build the necessary infrastructure. It makes a big difference if, to give you an example, a cement plant can store the CO2 in a distance of, let's say, up to 200 kilometers nearby, or whether the CO2 that is captured in that plant needs to be shipped to the North Sea, depending on the location of the plant. So, but these decisions need to be taken in a science-based way, and that's why the work of the geological surveys is so important for us.
Thank you very much. So your reference to raw materials leads me to pass the word to Rolf. Rolf, where do you see the key points of intersection between industry and geological survey organizations when it comes to research and innovation to drive a new era for European raw materials industry?
First of all, congratulations to SRIA, and it's really timely to have your vision on innovation. And also, I think the Clean Industrial Deal is based on the Draghi report, which is focusing on innovation to make us more competitive. Now, the interaction is very obvious, because with opening one mine needs 1,000 exploration projects, and 1,000 exploration projects need good data and good assessment, good maps of where you are going to conduct your exploration projects. And if you set the picture even bigger, to create societal acceptance for mining and for CCS, also more specific, we need to have the local communities, all of the actors inside of the chain, till you, at the end of the day, are able to mine an ore, to process it, and to deliver it to society. You need a good acceptance, and that means we need good data, good knowledge of what is out there, good guidance on how to conduct exploration, to convince local communities to be accepting this. And that's where we come in also as Euromites, as a lead organization of the European and EFTA mining industry, that we need to secure that all of the exploration that is needed, because when you have a good map and you start to identify something, you need to drill, and you need to be on the ground, and you need to conduct this exploration. And that, I think, is vital, that we all work together, that we understand each other, to make it that society is going to see that they have to embrace mining and all of the actors there, because we are doing this for the sake of the society, which is in need of all of those commodities to decarbonize the society. So that closes the loop again. We can only achieve our 2050 targets, the Green Industrial Deal and the Green Deal, if we all work together and aim to also mobilize society with this.
Thank you very much for those comments. Okay, I'm going to pass over to Jeroen now and ask where do you think the potential opportunities for a geological service sit in FP10?
I think that's the million-dollar question that everyone wants to answer. The short answer is I don't know, because there is no FP10 yet on the table, and it is not yet clear how FP10 will look in terms of priorities and directions. The longer answer, I think, starts with the question, why should it be under FP10? I think that is the elephant in the room as well. Your strategic vision in the policy paper that I saw from December says that you want to have this geological service be established under FP10. The question is, why would you like to be dependent on a research program that has a limited duration, that is repetitive, that has to be renewed all the time, and that is focused on research? And we have seen that the establishment already of this project was quite difficult as it was in the beginning. We had long discussions with several colleagues in the room, going down from a budget of initially 700 million to 336 million for a partnership on Horizon Europe. Finally, we found a solution that we could only do this with what we have now. Part of this is due to the fact that geological science is not as such an area in the research programs as such. It's not delineated like that. We work with clusters. In Horizon Europe, we have cluster 4 on industrial technologies, where materials is mainly a part. We have cluster 5, which is about climate, energy, and mobility, where the geoenergy part and CCS and geothermal is in, and hydrogen. And then we have cluster 6 on natural resources, where, for example, the inland water can be in. Now, it was difficult to find a common ground, so in the end it was cluster 5, the budget that we are sitting on, that was responsible, that has taken responsibility for this. Partnerships were discussed at the time, and partnerships under FP10 are also uncertain, because there is a tendency towards less partnerships in FP10 rather than more. And partnerships, in our terminology, have a focus on research, whereas the research is not per se the main focus of a geological service of Europe. It's your data infrastructure much more, because the monopoly for geoscience is not only with the geological surveys. So ring-fencing a budget for geological surveys and singling out those services as the main partners in there is difficult. Recognizing the fact that you have a mandate towards your national authorities, you have to have a very good narrative towards FP10, whether you want to focus on research activities or on services. And if it's about the services, which I think is the main raison d'etre of this geological service for Europe, then there might be more space in what you have also identified in one of your deliverables of the project, in a European Digital Infrastructure Consortium. You have, as one of your deliverables, a draft. I've seen the draft on the feasibility of extending this initiative. The final report should come out any day now, I understand. This is much more in line of what you want to do. So the question should not be mainly if it is under FP10, but under the next multi-annual framework, probably, to see what can be done there. And but as for the research components that pertain to geoenergy, that will certainly be a key area. CCS is gaining importance in the Commission. Geothermal is gaining importance in the Commission. Hydrogen, of course, underground storage of hydrogen is becoming more important. The joint undertaking for clean hydrogen, for example, has launched a study on this as well to do that. So there is interest growing for those issues. And so this is, for now, let's say, keep our hopes up for the next MFF.
Okay, thank you. All right, looking at the audience, is there any reaction or any comment, any questions that anyone would like to raise? Paul, okay, do we have a microphone? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jeroen, also for your valuable comments on the focus of whether this fits under an FP10 framework. It lines up with some discussions that we were having this morning, so it's interesting to hear that from you as well. We've been talking about a couple of topics of the SRIA now, so about minerals and the carbon storage activities and energy, of course. Another important topic of the SRIA is groundwater, which is presented in the context of climate change, but an important topic there as well is groundwater in the context of the green transition, which is dealing directly with sort of the competing uses of groundwater for drinking water, for environmental issues, for energy purposes. So I would like to know what your view is on that as well.
Good question. It is, I must honestly say, it's not my area. Water. It's not in our cluster 5, climate, energy, and mobility. It is in a different cluster, cluster 6, where there is a partnership which is called the Water for All. And issues like inland water and groundwater are found probably there. Having said that, I recall that in the discussions that we had internally in the Commission, when we were discussing this project, there was very little appetite for Cluster 6 to participate in this area. Probably because they were having this partnership already, so they were looking at a more focused approach there. So it is important, but it is not so much an area that is aligned in our current Cluster 5. I don't know how FP10 will look like. We look at issues on, let's say, the energy-water nexus. That there water comes into our, let's say, in our narrative. When we look, for example, on for hydrogen, the use of seawater for direct electrolysis of seawater, the use of the reduction of water use for CCS, for example, for those processes. There we look at water, but not so much or water contamination in the sense of environmental protection of the technologies that we develop. But this is as far as it goes now. So further than that, I cannot answer your question for the future. It's a good question, though.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, I might turn back to Stephanie again now. Could you tell us a bit more about what progress has been made on implementation of the Net Zero Industry Act and how you see the balance between research and innovation and implementation, and particularly in terms of the draft that you've seen of what we've presented in our SRIA?
Yes, of course. I mean, I can, of course, mainly pronounce myself on the implementation of the Net Zero Industry Act when it comes to the CCS, or the CO2 injection capacity obligation that is there. So there is an obligation for the oil and gas producers to provide 50 million tons of annual storage or CO2 injection capacity by 2030. And there we are currently in the process of implementing that through, first of all, identifying the obligated entities. It's linked to past or historic production of oil and gas in the EU. And there's a delegated act under preparation. And then we will also take a Commission decision on identifying the obligated entities. At the same time, there are many other aspects where member states are already making progress on the implementation of the Net Zero Industry Act, the single point of contact identification, like very relatively, I don't want to say minor things, but things that are not catching the eye of the public in general, but that are very important when it comes to rolling out these kind of policies. In particular, also what we are very much working on is that member states start to identify full value chain CCS projects as strategic projects under the Net Zero Industry Act, because net zero strategic projects benefit from certain provisions, then most notably of an 18-month timeline for the permitting of the projects, so which is, when you want to advance these kind of projects, quite crucial that the permitting processes are streamlined and move forward fast. So that is in terms of the implementation of the Net Zero Industry Act. The balance between research and innovation and implementation, well, one needs to lead to the other. That is very clear. I mean, research and innovation at a certain point needs to happen on the ground. I mean, my team is also rolling out the Innovation Fund, which is all about that. It's about bringing projects that maybe previously have been funded by the Horizon Europe program at a research state, but getting those projects with a high TRL to the market and get them to a commercial readiness level that makes them in the end then viable business cases. So here we are. I think for CCS it's the same. We have a number of CCS projects already in the remit of the Innovation Fund, and the striking, or going back to the research that you have been doing, if I may call it, under the project that is funded by Horizon Europe, will be also crucially important when rolling out CCS projects in the long term, because I referred before to the CO2 investment atlas. So we have the storage atlas identifying the storage sites, but we want to get to an investment atlas, which means that we need investable underground storage, that you have to not only identify the capacity that is there, but also know what is the storage readiness. So is the potential storage site really something that can actually in a short term be used for a business, and that's where from my perspective R&I joins implementation. So even where that information becomes available. What is of course very important also is that we work, and I saw that in your presentation, on a common approach to represent that CO2 storage potential. Only if across the EU there is an agreement on the approach, on the criteria, in a single market, because we are operating in a single market, that then member states can also have first of all a public debate about those storage sites, but then also start their pre-appraisal work and rolling out the permits that are actually needed afterwards.
Can I have a quick reaction
Yes, please.
on this? It's very important what you mentioned, the investment atlas for CO2 storage. Just to expand a bit on that, it is something that we co-created very much together with the colleagues from DG Klima and DG Energy. It was already announced in the so-called Industrial Carbon Management Strategy. We have proposed this in the next framework program, or in the next work program, the 2025 work program, which is still under discussion, but it is close to adoption. What we say in that topic for this investment atlas is that it is important that the proposal demonstrates that the consortium has access to the data that is needed for subsurface, and therefore collaboration or participation of this consortium, or the composition of the consortium, should reflect national agencies, for example, the geological surveys that actually have those data. So we strongly underline that. So there's a role there, particularly for geological surveys, because frankly, I wouldn't know who else could do this.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, Rolf, perhaps you could give a little bit more perspective of your thoughts on the research and the implementation actions in the SRIA that relate to raw materials.
I think it's focusing on having a business case and having the investments that go with the business case. And what we see is that our exploration companies have difficulties in finding venture capital and finding investors. And especially in Europe, those who are investing in exploration in Europe come from Australia or for Canada. So we have a difficulty in reaching our investments communities in Europe to go into that business. Is that only because they are able to take the risk? I would not say. I think they probably understand better what is happening. And I would say that with a better understanding of the grounds and the geological potential that Europe has, then we will have a chance maybe to develop more business cases. So new geoscientific methods and technologies are key to be able to tap this potential. And I also think that the role of geoscience in assessing the environmental footprint, as already explained, might be a good parallel way, because we don't want to lose out on our environmental ambitions. We want to keep the high level of environmental ambition. And I will simply quote what we have today as mining companies. With in Kiruna, with LKB, we have the biggest iron ore mine in the world. With KGHM in Poland, we have one of the 2 biggest silver ore bodies in the world. And so very often we are perceived as something which is not necessary, at least not in our backyard. I would say those companies that have proven that with 200 years of existence in Europe, that they are sustainable and that we can marry the environmental ambition together with the needs for raw materials. And I want to stress again, and I attended the EIB forum last week. We were the last panel of a very, very rich 3 days in Luxembourg. All of the concerns of the world have been discussed, are tackled, and in that panel, I think it was quite clear that we need to change our attitudes in Europe toward the sector and also towards geoscience and towards all of this. I see with colleagues here that it's very that it's being picked up, that it's tackled, but there's certainly much more to be done.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Rolf. And you raised the issue of environmental issues, which are very prevalent in our SRIA and very important as well, across different spheres, not just in relation to raw materials, but other thematics as well. Are there any questions or comments from the audience at this point? Luca?
Good afternoon. My name is Luca Guerrieri from Italy, East Geological Survey of Italy. I want to take the opportunity to remark a bit on geohazard. That is quite a novelty in this kind of strategic documents on research for geological surveys, because in general geohazard is considered a national issue. That for example, in Italy we have to face with earthquakes, volcanoes, floods, and landslides, everything that is considered a national issue and without a European perspective. But I think that for some hazard, it's clear that, as we learned in the last years, that there is also an impact of this on the effects of this hazard from climate changing, from global warming. So this is something that has no border. It's something that needs a European perspective, a global perspective, of course. So in this sense, I think that geological surveys can play an important role because we have data, we can provide assessment, and again, the SRIA, I think, is incorporating this message. I think is in a proper way. So I just a comment on the to point out that it is, in my opinion, a novelty that should be point out in this strategic document.
Thank you very much. I don't know if any of the panelists would like to reflect on that at all. Okay, all right. I'd like to take up something that you mentioned earlier, Jeroen, about the issue of service provision. So our strategic research and innovation agenda, it actually proposes an almost equal split of research and implementation actions which are necessary to tackle the challenges that we see in the geoscientific, the broad spectrum of geoscientific areas that are relevant to policy at European level. That's also reflected in the work and the outputs of the GSEU project, which is designed to build the precursor for a sustainable geological service for Europe. You mentioned service provision in relation to data infrastructure. What we've presented in terms of service-related implementation actions is actually broader than just data infrastructure, but also policy advisory, monitoring-related issues across different areas. what is your perspective on the need for integration between research and policy implementation actions?
In general, you mean? Well, in general, I think one of the examples we already have seen and that we discussed is this working? Oh, no. I'm not sure it's working, but yeah, okay. So, first of all, the geological surveys, it's in the DNA of your services to combine research and implementation. If we look at the investment atlas that was mentioned as well by my colleague, that is a great example of how research and data gathering will help to support both national and European policies to implement them, because we have with the Net Zero Industry Act, for example, and the Industrial Carbon Management Strategy, we have the targets of 50 megatons of CO2 to be stored by 2030. Now, this requires that we identify a lot of storage space. And for this reason, we also implement, as a research action, this investment atlas. This will have to be carried out by Geological Services. So it has two components. You will have, as your national mandate is to support the your national administrations with geological advice as a service. And this is the implementation of both national policies and European policies. And for that, you need to gather the data, you need to have the infrastructure, but you also need to do some research to do that. And this is, I think, the normal interplay that we see. In terms of research projects, we see as well that Geological Services have a lot of input to make to research projects that we're already running in Horizon Europe. We see that many Geological Services are partners in our research projects because they can address many of the issues that are there. Many of the projects we already do in areas like carbon capture and storage, for example, are already very much multidisciplinary, implementing research together with implementing and deployment actions, for example, planning regulations for pipelines, etc. So there's a lot of need for players who can address both these issues, and there's a strong role for the Geological Surveys.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? Please feel free to speak up if you have any. But you mentioned, sorry, question.
I don't know if it's a question that you have later. I'm Paula Cantelli from Spain. I'm really happy with the CO2 storage, with the mining. However, I don't know if the new situation in Europe makes us to think a little, it will be any change in the priorities of the Commission? Do we need to review something, the SRIA, perhaps there is other topics that we need to be aware? If you know, of course, because I know that it's very new. Thank you.
Shall I go? Yeah. I think we can acknowledge that we have a paradigm shift. So I think it's all women and men on deck. I think we are looking at the issues. We are writing clean industrial deals, strategies. Now we need to act. Now it needs to happen. And if you look at the Critical Raw Materials Act, for example, which is a good starting point, we will soon have the strategic projects. But then to have it, make it happen at the end of the day, that a mine is opened in all of the good conditions that we want to see it open, it means that all of the actors, from the member states to the regions to the municipalities to the local communities, that all of those are all also in the same spirit of probably most of us here in the room, that something needs to happen. It is not simple acting at European level which will change the world. So it needs to really have all actors committed to the realization of it. And I very much hope that also this is also done by the European Commission. It's helping, facilitating that process. So there is a Critical Raw Materials Board where all member states come together so they can exchange on what is happening. We see, for example, already today in this faster permitting inside of the Critical Raw Materials Act, which is one of our key requests, to make timelines from 10 to 15, 20 years in mining much shorter, so that we can have access to raw materials much faster. That to make this happen in a good way. And in Finland, in this process, 7 environmental authorities are being streamlined in the direction of a one-stop shop. So to have this problem tackled. I also recommend that once this list is out of a strategic project, that member states, and we are not talking about thousands of mines, so there are 77 extractive projects now in the pipeline. Not all will pass the test, and not all are in the EU, so it's very dispersed. I think the maximum is in Sweden and in Finland that the most candidates are to be found, and then we need to have those actors to realize it and to make it happen on the ground. So I think it's not a given that it will be successful. I hear also lots of skepticism, but I think we've started a way that is feasible, and it's going to help to solve the needs.
Thank you, Rolf. Okay, there's been some mention of targets on a longer-term timescale, 2030, 2040, 2050. Of course, there are carbon storage targets on those timescales. When we're talking about our vision of a geological service for Europe to support policy implementations, Stephanie, how do you see that this can fit into that longer-term vision of targets on that timescale?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, we have this, well, I don't know whether we should call it a vision, because it's actually set out in European legislation. So we have a concrete target of becoming climate neutral by 2050. So it's a legal obligation, if I may say, and we're working towards that. We have some modeling out there that this would actually mean that we capture 450 million tons per year of CO2, and a big part of this for storage, and that's indeed where, you know, the vision that you have outlined, without the need for me to pronounce myself on whether that means we need to create new bodies or new institutions, but it fits very well with the objectives that we are pursuing. It is, well, the geological data infrastructure was already mentioned several times by now. Maybe one aspect that we haven't mentioned, but that when it comes to CCS is crucially important, is also what you have included in your agenda when it comes to well, stakeholder engagement or engagement with the wider public. Because actually, you know, for most of our decarbonization technologies like solar PV, there's a relatively simple case to be made for people when they start to benefit and actually benefit, you know, from the technologies. So I install solar panels on my house, I can, you know, see my bill going down. That is, you know, relatively simple. For storing CO2, it's much more difficult, because the ones who will have that storage sites in the nearby area, they don't have an immediate benefit of storing CO2 in that area. So and there's a lot of this NIMBY phenomenon going on. So really there's a need to engage, and then when we talk about a geological survey, I mean, this engagement needs to happen based on facts, based on science, and also in a harmonized way across the EU, so that we are not looking only at the local circumstances, but that we also explain why at a European scale that is needed. I spent yesterday evening with some Walloon parliamentarians and some parliamentarians from North Rhine-Westphalia discussing CCS. It was quite interesting, because indeed there are some regions in the EU where the storage potential is much more limited. So how to convince somebody in a completely different region that they should take the CO2 from a Walloon cement plant? That's a challenge. But that's where I am convinced we will only win that debate if we can, you know, provide sound information, sound data on what is feasible and why we're doing it, and that's where your work will be crucially important.
That's a very good point. I'd like to elaborate on that. Many thanks for bringing that up. That is a role indeed for geological surveys, public engagement. The CCS story is a very good case in point. But I think there in order to get people along, we should start telling a different story. Too often CCS is seen as a way to decarbonize the fossil fuel power plants, fossil fuel power industry, and that does not ring with the general public. So we need to have a good narrative that is both appealing to the public, who is concerned about environmental issues and polluting industries, big cities, harbors that you see. If you drive along the Antwerp Ring, you will know what I mean. But you also have a narrative that is relevant for policymakers, politicians at political timescales, because they are concerned about being re-elected. So this is quite a different narrative. So you have to embrace a narrative for CCS that is about decarbonization of industry, so therefore decarbonization of pollution as well, competitiveness of that industry as well, to have them arrest on that, jobs and growth, and that consortium of parameters, there may be a role for CCS, and that may ring better with the public. And this is important as well, I think, for geological surveys to bring that message, because politicians themselves are not considered reliable source to bring those messages. That is very often the case.
Maybe if I may compliment, because we are not in any way supporting CCS for power plants, and that's also where there's clearly no business case with the rollout of renewables. So we are, I mean, what we are looking at in the industrial carbon management strategy is indeed decarbonizing industrial processes, emission-intensive sectors, and we in particular look at residual emissions. So CCS is definitely not about ruling out any mitigation options that are available at a much lower cost.
And Jerome, you mentioned that there is dedicated responsibilities, and I would say it's a societal, and I would welcome that politicians are courage enough to lead the way also on difficult topics, because I think we are lagging also this kind of leadership, because the sector will always be accused of being in a self-interest of doing something, and what you are explaining is exactly what's happening in the mining industry. So if we don't have a good transparent communication, we will never gain the trust, but this is what is happening, I think, and what the European mining industry is representing, and the same for the CCS sector. And then we should also be able to have politicians that lead the way on difficult topics, because being re-elected on easy things, that's I think it should not be the way forward. People need to be re-elected on the difficult things, and that's the decarbonization, and it's having an honest, true story about what it entails. I always take the reference to the French railway system, which is fabulous. If we would not have had a Décret National Europe in the 70s and 80s, we would have not the most fascinating, best decarbonized railway system like it's in France. So I think it needs courage to do that, and it needs something sometimes also to override an interest somewhere, and that's what politicians need to do.
I absolutely agree. One comment that I would like to make in this respect is for CCS. That's the area I know best. If I compare several years ago, around 2009, when we had this large EPR, it was called, where it was €1 billion to support 6 large demonstration plants across Europe. The last one standing was in the Netherlands. The rest all failed for political support in the member states. The Commission had the budget ready on the table. The last one was in the Maasvlakte area, where in the end there was a new election in the Netherlands. There was a new government where they killed support for all coal-fired power plants, including new ones that were to be fitted with CCS. So at that point in time, of course, the industry withdrew. Although the Commission has a long-standing support for this. If you see now, for example, in the Rotterdam area, in the Portos project that is going to store offshore in the North Sea, this is the result of an industrial consortium that tries to push it with European funding through the Connecting Europe facility, for example. So I agree that you need to have political support, but the national governments very often have a very short memory and very short re-election period, and that makes it sometimes difficult in practice.
No, it's exactly like you say, and just we have new interconnection, or not that new, I don't exactly know when the date was, between Sweden and Germany. This has led to increasing energy costs for the southern Sweden, which has put the politicians under enormous pressure because the costs for the households in Sweden has risen. So this shows how complex all of this interconnection and all of those different ambitions from decarbonization to resilience are to be met.
Ralph, when it comes to political direction and leadership, so now we have the Clean Industrial Deal, what do you think of the proposals for raw materials that are presented there?
I think they found luckily a little place in there somewhere in the middle, but that's also due to the fact that we have just received the big present of the Critical Raw Materials Act in 2024, and I think innovation, competitiveness, and the large task of decarbonization is well addressed in the Clean Industrial Deal. And now it's all a lot of words and a lot of actions and a lot of bold words that still need to be much more concrete. So Decarbonization Accelerator Act and things like that, that sounds very good. Now it needs to meet the needs. Let's just simply take the steel sector. We do have the potential from a mining perspective to have the pellets and to produce the sponge iron. But if you look at the sheer enormous amounts of electricity that are needed for this to proceed this hydrogen route. So today we need roughly 4 terawatt. Full needs are 10 terawatt today. In the new setting, it's 90 terawatt. So you see, you are kind of having an enormous amount of electricity that is needed, and that shows the big challenges that are there, and that needs to be addressed and discussed.
Thank you, Rob. I see we have a question up the back.
Thank you very much. I'm Ilaria from the European Association of Geoscience and Engineering. I was wondering, in these discussions you're talking about critical raw materials, are we also talking about the importance of critical raw materials for the rearm plan of Europe as well?
I think so. I think I always say no rare earths in Europe, no defense for Europe, and I hope with the last decision of the good guy in Washington, we will not see that we need to replace 2,000 tanks in the next coming weeks because the US troops are going to leave Europe. So sheer the need of raw materials for tanks, for all of the digital technologies that you need now in modern defense, I think is enormous. It's only making a story that we've been telling before much more pertinent, because at the end of the day, we all know what we need to make a chair, and it needs to come from somewhere. So it's not only about the defense. Now, defense is the most urgent thing, because if you don't have peace, then you have nothing. So you don't need to decarbonize if you don't have peace. But we surely always needed all raw materials. We've simply neglected and not looked at it, and that's also where eco-design, environmental footprinting, all of this understanding of the complexity of raw materials that build the essence of our society. This is something. And please find politicians that can explain to you what a recycling quota is. I think it's very important that we also have a huge discussion about what we are talking about. 40% recycling quota of copper worldwide doesn't mean that you have 60% potential. No, it means that we are building up an urban stock, and we are still pushing much more copper into the markets. So the ramp up of the urban stock is building up before in 20, 30, 50 years we will have a chance to recycle it. So I think it's very important that we have a good knowledge base on what we are talking about.
Thank you. I think we have time for one last question here.
Thank you. My name is Kostas Laskaridis. I am from the Geological Survey of Greece. A question, at the moment there is in Greece a project as a key part of the Mediterranean strategic plan which has been developed by France, Italy and Greece with the aim of creating the first commercial CO2 storage in Southeast Mediterranean. In the Prinos field, in the depleted Prinos field in North Greece. But at the moment there are many reactions from the people, because the Prinos field, there is about 2 kilometers from the many touristic Thasos Island. And have your opinion how we can solve this reaction, how we can take the social licensing for this project. This is the same like the mineral extraction. We need the social licensing. How we can this?
For me, that can. Now, I'm not a CCS expert, and I don't know that concrete project, but I know mining a bit in Greece, which has been also controversial over time. I think it's transparency and communication that builds trust. So, and like I explained earlier, I think it starts at the very beginning. So if you start to invest already with mapping, you need to have an ethical code of conduct. So you need to pursue the values that I think we all agree on, and we don't want cowboys to go out there and just try to discover something and to do something. So from the very early stage, you need to have a very good communication, and you need to have all of the authorities and actors on board. So if you already have enemies, so you have already a political fight between two parties in one constituency, it's very difficult to have a project. So I don't want to name many projects, but it's always depending also on the reliability of the political leadership to embrace a project. I don't know your project very concretely, but for sure, okay, you at the end of the day, you also need to make a decision. CCS, there is a risk, is there a risk or not? And people who are living there need to accept it, because otherwise you will have 10, 20 years of opposition. And this doesn't bring the business case, and that doesn't bring the investors, and that doesn't allow you you will simply have, like in the mining, you have many projects that are out there for 10, 20 years. So they are not seeing the daylight because they have been very difficult to handle over so many years. So I cannot give you a concrete advice besides the fact that you need to have a good communication to all concerned actors.
Stephanie?
Yeah, and just if I can compliment, because what you just said about the risk, I think is really crucial, because I think we need to be clear on what the risks are with this kind of activity. From a climate perspective, the risk of a leakage of a CO2 storage site is that CO2 is emitted into the atmosphere. That per se is status quo. So, that I think, many people first need to realize. Then the second risk that may be there, indeed, and that links actually back to the discussion that we're having today, is related to the geology, to the subsoil, to the performance of the subsoil. And is there a risk, yes or no? That's where we need, to have the science right and communicate on that. Only if we can say, yes, we analyze. We will probably not have all the answers. It's a fact of life that economic activities have a certain risk, and there's no zero risk activity out there. But that we minimize that risk, and that we can show that we have done our utmost to study it, to mitigate the risk, that is the only way, in my view, to convince then later on also the public that this is worthwhile doing. I'm not saying this is happening overnight. So if you're engaged in a concrete project, that more work may need to be done, but I do think it's really, really important to have a public and informed debate about the risks of CO2 storage.
Thank you very much. I'm going to say that we're done here. I really appreciate this discussion we've had. I think it's really valuable, and thanks very much for the questions as well. Our panelists, we really appreciate your time and your insight. And I would like to finish by also thanking our community, and particularly our expert groups who have contributed so much in putting this strategic research and innovation agenda together. And now we look forward to the next steps in actually bringing this to realization through our continued efforts to establish a geological service for Europe. Thank you all, and please enjoy a small reception.